Right. Hello and welcome everyone to Q&A session 2. Hope you all have been hard at work. We're actually well into the World Jam now, almost halfway actually. We're on week 3. So hope you guys have gone past the brainstorming stage, I hope. And now I've actually gotten started to actually coding, right? So I think a lot of you guys are on board now, and we've seen you guys have some questions on scripts, on character animations, and UI and UX related kind of questions. So to kick things off, I'm gonna start. So I'll go into buckets, right? I'll go. They'd be like scripting questions, there'll be animation questions, there'll be UI questions. To start with, let's go with scripts. All right, how do we script? My first script related question. All right, this is a bit of a general question. John and Maldo, any of you want to take this? So are there any specific coding patterns or practices that devs should follow to maintain, make sure that the scripts are clean and organized when you're doing it, when you're scripting out a whole project?
So I can start off. There definitely is a lot of like resources online about which which kind of code, how you should be organizing and scripting your code. One of the most important things to understand when you're coding is what is expensive to do and what is not expensive to do. Like what are the functions that are very heavy on your machine, and what are things that you shouldn't do. Like for example, if you know that what update does, right? Update is a function that runs every single frame, right? If you know that that runs every single frame, and then you're putting very heavy code in there, then you know that every single frame while your game is running, that's going to be kind of eating a part of your CPU lifetime, right? So a part of your CPU clock time. So that's stuff to keep in mind of, like, doing research on and understanding what all the standard Unity functions are, like start, awake, update, know what they do in the context of ZEPETO or game development. Understanding all of those things is going to be very important, and then keeping in mind what are things that you should not be doing. Like for example, you shouldn't, like, a common thing that I think some newer developers do is they do camera.main. And what that does is it always does like a find and get component of the camera, and that's very expensive. But it's so easy to just write camera.main, and then a technique that you should be doing often is caching those like expensive routines, right? So then in the start function, you should be caching some of those like heavy calculations, so that you can use them later on in your code. So different things like that you should be doing. Just as you're developing, you're gonna kind of pick up on these things, and kind of figure out how to structure your code a little better so that it runs a little bit cleanly. If you're working in a team, commenting is going to be very important, so that you're always commenting your code so that other people know what it is you're thinking and doing. So that and even for yourself, when you come back to this project a year later and you don't know what's going on, that's going to be a little bit tough on you too. So.
All right, thanks, Sean.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna add to that a little bit. Yeah, I totally agree with what everything that John said. Like, commenting is super important. The other part is to, like, don't be afraid to name your either functions or classes like what they actually do. So I know a lot of times people want to just name a function like some maybe like a function does something and they just make it like, let's say the function bakes a cake, and they instead of naming it like bake a cake, they maybe name it like BAC or something like that. So don't be afraid to like name your functions exactly what they do. Another thing that you might want to look into, and this is more general, is so for code structure, an idea that's pretty popular in programming is a single responsibility principle. If you look it up, you'll find tons of things about it. But basically, every class, every module, every function should have one responsibility. So you shouldn't have a class that does like. So basically, you could make your game and just throw everything in one class, one giant script, but that would be, obviously, as your game gets more complex, that's not possible. So as you're breaking your code up into classes, each class has its own function. For example, like there's maybe a character manager, there's a UI manager, things like that. Like each class does its own thing. Each function within the class does one thing. So that's just like kind of a more general code structure kind of thing that I can think of right now. Yep.
Cool. Thanks, guys. My next script question, maybe goes on to more multiplayer related kind of realm, multiplayer realm. So the question is scripting in a multiplayer game very different from scripting a single player game? Is it harder? Or what do we have to take note of?
It's going to be definitely very, very different. Before you start your project, you're going to want to make sure to decide which path you're going to be going down, because it's going to be harder to add that in after the fact, because there's so much things that you have to consider. What you might consider a simple game might turn into a complex project as soon as you start thinking about how multiplayer would be implemented into it. And there's also things like, there's going to be a lot of learning steps that you're going to have to do to troubleshoot issues that you encounter, particularly surrounding like when you start testing in multiplayer, you're going to come into issues like this person is on, at this state, this person's on this state, like that comes clashing into each other. How do I resolve those issues? Like, this person caused this issue, and then on this machine, you're not just considering bugs that happen just on your local machine and handling those. You're considering issues that happen on other people as well. So like, proper syncing of everybody's machines in your server is going to be another thing that you're going to be tackling a lot too. So while I say this, I do want to encourage you not to shy away from multiplayer too much. But just know that it is going to be a lot more independent study and practice on your part. So if this is maybe your first time diving into Unity, maybe start with a single player project and then challenge yourself with multiplayer down the line. But like if you feel comfortable in coding and you have some general understanding of like, client server architecture, ZEPETO is going to be very familiar to you. It's going to be very easy for you to catch on those things if you already know about that stuff. It may even be easier for you to use our systems because it's a little bit more simplified than maybe what standard client server architecture might consist of. But for definitely, it's going to be very, very different. And like it's going to make your project a little bit more complex right off the bat. So decide on a path first, and then make sure you're doing sufficient study before you get into multiplayer. We do have resources on our Notion page too. So take a look at some of those things, and if they hit you like I have no idea what this stuff is, then maybe kind of take some more time to study it before you decide to go heavily into multiplayer. Yeah, so maybe use those things as a reference point.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that yes, multiplayer is going to be much more difficult, but definitely don't want to discourage you from doing it. But if you are going to do it, definitely it's going to involve a lot of self-study. The example projects on the Notion page, there's some in there that talk specifically about multiplayer, about how to send messages back and forth. But not only that, but like John was saying, you need to really think about, if it happens on your client, then everyone else the same thing has to happen. So you have to sync all these pieces of information. Definitely doable, but it's going to involve a lot of self-study with knowing how messages work. And another thing that is a useful tip if you are going to do multiplayer is to really think about state management. So basically, a game is in a state. So is the game in the beginning? Let's say you're making FPS. Is the game in the beginning? Is the game now ongoing where they're attacking each other? Is the game ended where you're now like watching like let's say a leaderboard screen or something like that? But really separating your game into different states. This goes back to actually the first question about coding structure. A good thing to read up on, even though you may not understand everything when you first read it. I know I didn't when I first read up about this, but coding patterns, like design patterns, is a good thing to read up on. And it's basically talks about how to structure a code in different ways to accomplish different things. So I think a famous book is like Programming Patterns. I can't remember the author right now. John, maybe you remember, but it's like I forgot the author, but I believe it's called Programming Patterns. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks, guys. So that's all script related questions, which is which is good, which means people are actually reading the resources and like, you know, they're not too overwhelmed by scripting, because I understand that's gonna really difficult part of world development, right? So the next set of questions are related to animation. So we've got an interesting question. How do you ensure that the animations are smooth when the player goes from like running to walking to staying still? How do you make it like smooth and transition properly?
So I think that for animations, you're gonna want to look into animation state machines. So this is a kind of a feature in Unity where basically you can set up like different animation states, and then it's kind of like a visual like visual GUI where you can kind of drop animations in, and you can kind of connect lines between your different animations, and then have different kind of let's say conditions, like trigger the movement between one animation to another. And then Unity will automatically kind of automatically kind of like phase between one animation to another, so that you don't have to worry about like the in-between keyframes between one animation to another. So animation state, yeah, animation state machine is going to be the thing to look at and study, because that's going to be a very powerful tool, especially when you're working with animations to kind of smoothly transition between those animations. We do also have if you're talking about maybe customizing your character controller animations, we also have a guide on our Notion page on how to customize your animations there too. Like if you're maybe walking into water, to change your animation to a swimming one, or if you're crawling in sand, instead of walking in sand, you're like kind of crawling. So we have those kind of tutorials there too. Another thing to maybe consider is timeline. Could be another powerful tool if you're kind of creating big animation sequences, and then maybe you're creating a cutscene, right? Then a timeline is going to be very important, very kind of a cool thing to add into your world. So yeah, animation state machine and timeline maybe are the two things that we should start looking into for animations.
The other thing that you might also want to consider before you even do animation blending, because definitely it looks nice when animations blend together. But one thing you might want to consider is just not even have animation blending as a first pass, and just make sure that your animations actually just transition, even if it's just a snap transition from running to say idle, but making sure that those transitions actually work and that it feels correct. Because the one thing that you might want to consider too is because in game design, a lot of times, let's say you're playing, like a 2D side scroller, what's more important is actually the reaction time. So basically, if you walk and then you want to jump, you jump right away. Like there shouldn't be too much blending where it's interfering with your controls. So another thing to be aware of is, yeah, sometimes you might just not actually want any blending and you just want the controls to be snappy. So that's another thing to consider.
Cool, those are good points. So on to more complex animation stuff. This guy's asking, how do we make our characters wink or do the moonwalk, for example? Like I want to make them do more advanced stuff. Is there a way to do that? How do we do that? Yeah.
For winking, you can actually have control over the, I believe it's the, if you go into the character model, you'll see that there's, and you can post this question on Tech Questions channel again. But basically in there should be like keyframes that you can adjust for different facial morph targets, facial blending targets, and then you can actually animate those by hand. Me and John actually did that in a project that we worked on. But you can definitely make a character blink just by going in there and through code adjusting those keys. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Moonwalking.
Oh, moonwalking. I think the fastest way for that might just be go on to something like Mixamo and just type in moonwalking. I'm pretty sure Mixamo has that moonwalking animation. And then you should be able to just import that into Unity. Make sure that the animation type is set to humanoid, and you should just be able to use that animation. I believe Yeah, there's tutorials on the Notion page about animation, but yep, you should be able to find something on Mixamo.
But all right, looks like Mi-jung has the same problem with moonwalking. Yeah, everyone wants to make a moonwalking character. I know it's popular. All right, cool. I'm gonna move on to UI questions now. So here's a little bit, well, I think this one's a bit interesting. So it's like, can you share examples of very user-friendly menus or interfaces? How about I rephrase this question? What's the hallmark of like a really good UI or menu? Like, is it super like minimal, or is it gonna be like what goes through you guys' heads when you're trying to make a very clean and very functional and very pretty UI? Question for John and Mondo.
I think for UI, when I ever think about UI, like I just want it to be as simple as possible, where things are just obvious, like what you're supposed to do. And the way you make things obvious is like if something's super important, that button might be bigger, it might be more colorful, it might be whatever. Think of it as a hierarchy, right? Like it's the same with like visual arts or even coding. Like there's some sort of hierarchy. So if the button is super important, maybe it's bigger. But also just trying to not put too much things on the screen, not have so many windows you need to click through. Like if you can put everything in just one HUD, then do that. But if your game is a little more complex, you have to hide things behind other HUDs, do that. But I think like simplicity that still gets the functionality is probably what you're kind of aiming for.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think minimalism is probably the best thing to do. If you're a part of the optimization session that we did yesterday, minimalism is also going to be kind of a big performance thing too. So if you have more elements on screen, and if you're not using the texture atlasing kind of technique that I showed you, then that's going to be an extra draw call. Again, reference the video that we recorded if you're not sure what these terms mean, but that's going to be extra draw calls on your screen. That's going to be a lot more costly. So definitely try to make the number of things on screen minimal. And I mean, as far as assets go, there's plenty of assets on the Unity Asset Store that you can do. There's really cool kind of GUI packs that you can download and use in your world. But yeah, I think as far as from a design standpoint, like Mondal said, I think the less things that the user has to worry about, the better. Only critical information that needs to be displayed on screen, and then the less number of clicks to get to what you need to do, the better.
All right, cool. Okay, I have one question from Edwin, but I'll get to that right after this question I'm gonna ask right now, because we're still on the topic of UI. With a question asking, how do we make our UI have cool effects or like custom styles or animations? Is there a way to do that?
UI have custom effects. I think the quickest one is probably if you click a button and like some particle plays, you can probably just like make something where you click a button and you have this particle that just plays and it just plays and you just have to basically align it to the UI. But that would be like the simplest way you can do to add some more life to the UI.
You can definitely also add like simple animation using keyframing. So keyframe animations, you can easily kind of manipulate like the scale to make it kind of bounce in, or fly in from the side, or fade in. Whatever you might want to do. You can manipulate the UI to kind of do what you want. So if you have a click animation, then maybe while it's clicking, you want to kind of have it shrink a little bit. And then when you let go, then like, I mean, this is a mobile game. So when you tap on it and you let go, then, then like you can play those different animation states. But yeah, you can probably use keyframe animations to kind of add life to your UI and make it kind of a lot more, with more life in it.
Cool. All right, thanks guys. Now we'll go on to Ebin's question. I'll read out your entire thing, Ebin, if you don't mind. Hi everyone, thank you all for your mentorship. It was really a privilege listening to every one of you. Thank you, Eben. You're welcome. So my question is there a way I can implement third-party enemies without scripting? That is to say, a third-party enemy that shoots at the player once the player gets to a particular spot.
So for third-party enemies, it's going to be difficult to implement any complex behavior. It's going to be difficult to avoid scripting. But I think maybe the simplest way to implement the behavior that maybe you're thinking about is through navmesh. So basically what navmesh will allow you to do is you can just kind of click a button and it'll calculate all the different kind of paths that an enemy can take. So then you can tell an enemy and you can just give it a position, go to this position. Then it'll kind of navigate itself without you having to do any kind of complicated AI programming. And it'll just find its way towards the player. From that state, if you're probably going to have to code something where if it gets close enough to the character, it stops moving and then maybe starts shooting at the player. Yeah, but like if there's maybe like if the enemy is completely stationary, and then it's just maybe like a turret that's kind of facing the player and then firing, then you can use triggers to like collision triggers, where if the enemy enters into that collision trigger, then you can code it to maybe turn to the enemy and then fire a projectile. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so and if you have maybe more questions, then let me know if that's not clear.
Yeah, I think you can't run away from scripting whenever you involve like things like that, right? So yeah,
Right.
sorry about that. Yeah. So okay. All right. So once again, guys, any questions that you have, like Eben, if like Eben's question, anything you want to ask, just feel free to type into the chat. I've got one last question, and this is just coming from kind of myself. Is there any significant difference between with regards to UI? So there's people are playing on different screen resolutions, right, and different screen sizes. Do we have to take note of that when you guys make a world? Like when you make like the menus, like the sizes of the menu, do you have to take that into account, or does Unity automatically like translate that into whatever like device screen size resolution that the player is playing in?
For the most part, you're not gonna need to worry about screen resolution all that much. One thing that maybe you might want to look into is screen safe area. And that's gonna make sure that your kind of everything in your UI is kind of automatically adjusting to the, like, you know, some phones have like little notches and holes, right? And if you place UI in that location, then it's going to be covered by that hole. So there's going to be cases like that that you have to avoid. And screen safe area is going to be like what you would use to kind of compress everything down into a safe kind of resolution. So basically what screen safe area will do is it'll just give you what the proper resolution is so that it's safe for everything to fit into screen. Then from there you can scale down your UIs and your canvases down to match that screen safe area resolution.
All right, very helpful tip. Something just came up to the top of my head actually when I was thinking about Eben's question on scripting and how it's quite daunting, right? Remember that we have templates available on the resources page that you guys can look at, and you guys can try to adapt those like the scripts that are already there. John Mondo, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that a way to maybe like kind of accelerate your learning in scripting, or like kind of, you know kind of take reference from like existing code that you guys have made and kind of like adapt that into your own world? Is that a way to go about it, perhaps?
For sure. There's guides. I think we in the very beginning, like intro, like 5 lessons, we avoided scripting so that you can develop a world without scripting if you can help it. But as soon as you start to get into more complex behaviors, like, you know, the behavior that Evan mentioned, where there's like AI and you might be shoot at enemies. There's some guys, like for example, I think we have like a tycoon guide where we implement nav mesh. We implement that kind of like navigation behavior. And like you might also find like in terms of like, you know, how to rotate something to start shooting at a character. There's guides from Brackeys, like on how a tower defense works, right? So then like, you know, a turret can turn to face an enemy and then start shooting. So there's different guides online like that you can maybe use. So definitely if you have any behavior that you want to implement, first check our Notion page. And then if it doesn't exist there, then maybe look into like Unity resources, because there's plenty of like Unity's been around for years and years. It's one of the top platforms, right? It's not just us as ZEPETO that use it. You know, developers worldwide are using it as the #1 platform, especially for indie developers. So there's already a lot of guides out there. The only caveat is that you're gonna have to make sure that you're translating your syntax a little bit to TypeScript, right? So then that's the only thing that maybe you'll have to learn is how does TypeScript syntax work, so that if I'm looking at how C# code looks like, how do I make it work in TypeScript? Don't just copy the C# code over. Like it's gonna be the same functions, just change the syntax up to work with TypeScript. But if you look up guides like that, there's gonna be plenty of guides, and then it's just gonna be up to you to translate those things. But
Yeah, cool. Thanks, John. So that's all the best guys for scripting. That's what John's trying to say. Go do your own research. Remember, first step, like what John said, go check out the resources page. A lot of information is there, and the team has done a really excellent job, like kind of making sure everything's really easy to understand. Also, ask us on the Discord help desk. We're always there. So if you really need like a specific behavior and you can't find it online, you can't find it on the resources, feel free to just give us a shout, and we'll try our best to help you. All right, cool. All right, so that's all we have for this session, this Q&A session 2. Hope you guys gained a lot of useful nuggets of wisdom and insight into world development here. So I think Mondo's been busy posting on the chat as well, all these helpful resource links, so do check those out. How to moonwalk on Mixamo. I know people are already looking at that. So yeah, all right. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Discord. We're there. That's it for today's Q&A session, guys. Happy hacking.